You're listening to the Finding Christ in the Old Testament series, preaching by Pastor Rick Dressler at Maple City Baptist Church in Chatham, Ontario. For more information about Maple City, please visit us online at maplecitybaptistchurch.com.
2 Samuel chapter 16 this morning. We come to this chapter understanding that at this stage in David's life, he is running for his life. Absalom has usurped authority in the kingdom, and now David is perhaps in one of the lowest times and portions of his life. Chapter 16, starting now at verse number 1. And when David was a little past the top of the hill, behold, Ziba, the servant of Mephibosheth, met him, and a couple of asses saddled, and upon them 200 loaves of bread, and 100 bunches of raisins, and 100 of summer fruits, and a bottle of wine. And the king said unto Ziba, What meanest thou by these? And Ziba said, The asses be for the king's household to ride on, and the bread and summer fruit for the young men to eat, and the wine that such as be faint in the wilderness may drink. And the king said, And where is thy master's son? And Ziba said unto the king, Behold, he abideth at Jerusalem. For he said, Today shall the house of Israel be restored to me, the kingdom of my father. Then said the king to Ziba, Behold, thine are all that pertaineth unto Mephibosheth. And Ziba said, I humbly beseech thee, that I may find grace in thy sight, my lord, O king. And when King David came to Bahurim, behold, thence came out a man of the family of the house of Saul, whose name was Shimei, the son of Gera. He came forth and cursed still as he came. And he cast stones at David, and all the servants of King David, and all the people, and all the mighty men were on his right hand and on his left. And thus said Shimei when he cursed, Come out, thou bloody man, and thou man of Belial. The Lord hath returned upon thee all the blood of the house of Saul, in whose stead thou hast reigned. And the Lord hath delivered the kingdom into the hand of Absalom thy son. And behold, thou art taken in thy mischief, because you are a bloody man. Then said Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, unto the king, Why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Let me go over, I pray thee, and take off his head. And the king said, What have I to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah? So let him curse, because the Lord has said unto him, Curse David. Who shall then say, Wherefore hast thou done so? And David said to Abishai and to all of his servants, Behold, my son which came forth of my bowels seeketh my life. How much more now may this Benjamite do it? Let him alone, and let him curse, for the Lord hath bidden him. It may be that the Lord will look on my affliction, and that the Lord will requite me good for this cursing this day. And as David and his men went by the way, Shimei went along on the hillside over against him, and cursed as he went, and threw stones at him, and cast dust. And the king and all the people that were with him came weary and refreshed themselves there. This is the word of the Lord. In 1968, the year of my birth, a song was released by an artist named Tammy Wynette. Anybody remember that name, Tammy Wynette? All right, all the old people remember that name. And the song became very popular in the 70s. Very popular. The truth is, I am a child of the 70s. We have pictures to prove it. I was a teenager of the 80s. I was a young adult in the 90s. And now in 2016, I'm just an old man. Right? But the song, if you recall, went something like this. The D-I-V-O-R-C-E becomes final today. Remember that part of that? It's swangy. I would do the whole song, but I know I would ruin it for you. And me and little Joe will be going away. And that song is really a tragic song. Because the little boy, as he's there, at whatever age he is, I picture 7 or 8 years old, maybe younger, maybe 6, the reason his mother and father are spelling the words divorce and custody is so that he doesn't understand what's happening. And he thinks, because they've spelled words before, that it's something about a surprise party or a gift for him. And the last line of the chorus says, "Oh, how I wish we could stop this divorce." My parents were spellers. And I'll never forget, to this day now, some 40 years removed, standing at a door with my father there and my mother there as they spelled. And it didn't take me long to realize what they were spelling. I'm not sure I knew what the word divorce, how it was spelled, but I knew what was happening. And I'll never forget being there, and my younger brother, I was the oldest, we began to weep, and we begged our mom and dad not to get a divorce. And I remember clearly saying, "Listen, we promise that we will behave." That's how little minds think. That somehow, some way, because we were bad, and we were, that we were the ones that drove them to this decision. And the truth is, I probably drove my parents to drinking. I'm not sure that I drove them to this decision. They tried to help us understand it was not on us. They just couldn't get along anymore. And they thought that this would be the best thing for our family. It's funny because it is 40 years removed, and I don't know why. It still makes me very emotional. Maybe because you know how to process things as you're older and you don't fully understand those things. But it was a big deal in my life. And you might wonder this morning, well, if that never happened, what would you be like? I mean, if this event, if your event or your event, if you could remove it, if you could take it away, if during the process you could say, "Stop," and it was done and it didn't happen, whether that was a person, a circumstance, an event that you're in right now, an infirmity, a problem, a difficulty, something that tempts you, if you could just say, "Stop," and it could stop, it could be done. And you had the power to do that. And if I could do that as a 6 or 7-year-old kid, if I could do that, would I be golden? Would I be awesome? Would my life be fulfilled and everything I could have ever dreamt that it would be? And maybe, just maybe, you've had those thoughts where you think, right now, where I find myself. If I could just remove this, if I could make this thing stop, I'd be awesome. I'd be awesome. My life would be near perfect. In this story of David, it's really a fascinating story. As we see him betrayed in the conspiracy there, we have a host of characters that are paraded out in front of us. And they're all fascinating characters. They truly are. And the thing about this story is, here comes Shimei, and David has the opportunity, literally the opportunity, to make this situation stop. Literally stop. And yet, he says, don't stop it. Don't change it. Leave it alone, and not only leave it alone, he says. This is from the Lord. Now, listen to me this morning. Do not hear what I am not saying. Okay? When I say this morning, this is a situation that David could have stopped, and he doesn't. I am not saying that as we look at David's life, there are not things in David's life that if he could have changed, he would have. And I'm speaking now about his sin. You and I understand as we go back through the story of David, 2 Samuel chapter 11, if David, when he was confronted and tempted with Bathsheba, if he could say, listen, if I could change anything, I would stop that. You better believe he would have changed that. I'm not talking this morning about a sinful past that we have been caught up in. And listen to me, we all have a sinful past. And that's why the story of David is such an awesome reminder that believers do not play with sin. I know that word today is not very popular in our culture. We mock the idea of sin. We think it's a joke. We as believers think that we can play with sin. But we cannot play with sin. And what we find here in chapter 16 is a continuation of what David did. These are the ramifications. So it's a good reminder for us this morning that you and I are not the exception or the exemption. Sin will destroy you. It will destroy you. And it comes along and it looks fun. It looks pleasurable. It looks sexy and exciting, and this will really fulfill me. And we get wrapped up in this thing. And let me just say to my dear Christian brothers and sisters this morning, you need to stop. Just stop for a moment. Because this is what your sin doesn't want you to do, and this is what my sin doesn't want me to do. Sin never wants you to play the whole scenario out. Because sin knows it cannot stand against the whole scenario. Why? Because sin always promises you the world, and it never fulfills its promises. Never. 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 And the price you pay for that is much higher than you could ever imagine. And so I'm not saying this morning, could we not all go back in our past and say, man, if I could have stopped, if I could take a breath, if I could have watched this thing play out, I would erase that. That's the truth, is it not this morning? We all have history, we all have the past, but that's the past. And that cannot be changed. What we find here in David's life is a circumstance that he has found himself in now. And regardless of how he got there, this is part of God's vision, but he is there now. And in the midst of this now, he does have the ability to say, stop. And it's done. And he doesn't. In 2 Samuel 16, we are introduced to the person of Shimei. Shimei is a descendant of Saul. Shimei is a human volcano. Human volcano. And Shimei believes that he knows exactly what is happening in David's life. He knows exactly what God is doing. And he's about to tell David, listen, Dave, this is what God is doing in your life. And so Shimei starts to curse David and say, David, the reason you are in this mess is because what you did to the household of Saul, my relative, the former king. And so Shimei is cursing and yelling and screaming. And as David is at the lowest point of his life, not only physically going through this valley, but metaphorically, he has lost everything. His son wants to kill him. He's on the run. And here is Shimei on top of the ridge, throwing dirt, dust, stones, and cursing, and calling David everything he could think of. And in the process, one of David's mighty men, Abishai, who's a military man, a man of action, is tired of the trash talk. And so he says, hey, Dave, why are you letting this dead dog curse? Let me go up and take his head off. Now listen, this is not hyperbole. What he means by this is, I will go up and I will take his head off. And Abishai has observed over his military career that men without heads don't curse anymore. And honestly, the problem would have been completely solved. He says, David, I've got an answer. I'll scoot up the hill. I'll take out my sword, and this dead dog will stop the cursing. I can, in this moment, deliver you from this circumstance, this situation. And David says something amazing. He says, let him alone. Let him curse. It's of the Lord. Now listen to me. David full well knew that he had nothing to do with the blood of Saul's house. The truth is, he had ample opportunities to put blood on his hand in Saul's house. He cut him twice in the cave where he was asleep. He could have done it. He didn't do it. He shows great kindness to Saul's house. He knows full well that he is not guilty with what Shimei is saying. And Shimei doesn't care about the truth. He doesn't want to know the truth. Shimei is the guy that whenever you're around him and someone brings up the name David, he's got something really bad to say. Doesn't care about anything else. David is the worst human being in the world to Shimei. David knows what he's saying is false. The blood of Saul's house is not on David's hand, but he full well knows that the blood of Uriah is on his hands. And what David knows is in this circumstance where he finds himself now, this is the ongoing consequence of his sin from chapter 11. He can stop it, and he says, let him go. Let him curse. Don't stop him. And then he says something very amazing in our text. Look, if you would, at verse number 12. So let him alone, let him curse. It may be. And in this statement, there is already this idea of hope for David. David knows what he's done. David knows where he's been. David knows why this is happening. David would rather not be here. He says, let him alone, because in my mind, it might be that the Lord, that Yahweh, it may be that the Lord will look on mine affliction. And David says, in this low valley of my life, with this guy cursing and throwing and casting and humiliating me, it might just be that this God will look at my affliction. That word affliction means he'll look at my eyes, he'll look at my countenance, he'll look at my trouble, he'll look at my misery, he'll look at all of the things that I have done to destroy this life. He will look at all of it, my affliction, and it just might be that this Lord, this God, will look at all of these things and requite or answer me good for the cursing this day. He says, this God that I serve, let him curse. It might just be that this curse that I am hearing, that I am feeling, that I'm experiencing, might just be that the Lord will take this curse and turn it into a blessing. Now listen to what I'm saying this morning. I'm not talking about the prosperity gospel. I'm not talking about, turn that curse into a smile and you'll be healthy and wealthy and wise. That's not what I'm talking about. Our ideas of blessings sometimes is so bizarre. Blessings in our life is not stuff. It's never stuff. The true blessing for the believer is that day by day I am being transformed into the image of Jesus Christ. He is making me new. He's making me like his son. And so David says, hey, let him curse. It might just be that this God will turn this around for good. David knew something about the character of his God. He knew that this God was a God of compassion and a God of longing for David, even in his discipline. It's amazing to study David, because the truth is, David knew his God. And even now, in this circumstance, He believes that this God is big enough and gracious enough to turn this around and to cause this to be a blessing in David's life. The writer Davis calls this the unguessable grace of God. And there's something in David that believes, even in this bad situation, the God that I serve is so big and so full of grace. Even at the fact that I'm here because of my own undoing, I still believe that he will turn this around. And what was a curse to me can be something good. Good. So the question for us this morning is, does David have any right to think this? And do we have any evidence to think this in our own lives? And I pray this morning as believers, you already do have evidence of this, but let me help you this morning. Galatians chapter 3 this morning, if you look with me at verse number 13, I think this will help us get a vision of what David sees and remind us of this God that we serve and his unguessable grace. Galatians chapter 3, look if you would at verse number 13. Paul says, Christ hath redeemed us from the curse of the law. Real simple. Paul says, I want you to know something, talking to believers, Christ has redeemed us from the curse of the law. Let me help you this morning. Here's the curse of the law. The curse of the law is this. You and I are guilty. Newsflash. I don't care who you are, where you're from, what you've done, your religious background, or how good you are in the community. You and I are sinners by nature and sinners by choice. And don't talk to me this morning about, I keep God's law, I keep his commandments, I follow the golden rule. We don't follow our own rules. We have standards in our life that I do this and I do that, but as soon as it goes against what's beneficial for us, we change it. And so the law says, here's God's moral standard of truth, integrity, faithfulness, purity, don't lie, don't steal, don't cheat, don't lust. Go down the list. And what the law says, as it looks at every one of us this morning, is it says, guilty. You better quit thinking that, okay, what is it that's going to send me to hell? What's the tipping point here? Let me let you in on something. Do you know that Christ didn't come to condemn the world? He didn't come to condemn the world. Do you know why? Because the world was condemned already. We are sinful men and women. Do you want to know what you have to do to go to hell this morning? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Because you have sinned against the holy, righteous, eternal God of the universe, and you, whether you know it or not, you have shaken your fist in his face and said, I will not have this man rule over me. I will do whatever I want to do. And so the law comes and the law says, hey, I don't care about what you're doing. I go a little bit deeper, not only your actions, but your heart, your motives, your intent. And the law says you are guilty. You and I, as human beings, are under the curse of the law. And here's what Paul says. Christ came to deliver us. And how does he do this? He delivers us because God made him a curse for you and for me. Hey, it's not about being Baptist or Catholic or good or bad or ugly or smart or anything else. The fact is we're all in the same boat. We were under the curse. And by God's grace, when I see Christ and what he has done, that God loved us. Talk about Valentine's Day. That the God of heaven loved sinful men and women who rebelled against him, who were enemy combatants of his. And he says, listen, in spite of that, while we were yet sinners, Christ died for you. And so the curse that you deserve, the curse that I deserve, was poured out on the head of Christ at Calvary's cross. And God was satisfied. And all those who repent and believe, not Baptist, not Catholic, not good person, not civil servant, none of it, repent and believe, can be saved. And so, right, the royal curse of sin, watch what God does. Through Christ, he takes this curse, and now he makes it a blessing for those who believe on him. Look at verse number 14. Curses everyone that hangs on a tree, Christ said it for us. That, okay, the curse, that the blessing of Abraham might come on the Gentiles through Jesus Christ, that we might receive the promise of the Spirit through faith. And what Paul is saying is, this God of unguessable grace takes the curse of sin, and by Christ, he turns it around so that you and I today are no longer enemy combatants of God. We are now saved, justified, cleansed, redeemed, beloved, adopted. We are sons and daughters of the King. And now this curse, because of Christ, has become a blessing. This is what God has done through sin. Sin abounded, grace did much more abound. But listen, he is not done. This God of unguessable grace is bent on completing what he started in us. Listen, he which hath begun a good work in you will perform unto the day of Jesus Christ. It is salvation. But do you understand something this morning? I hope you do. I have been saved by the blood of Christ. I am saved. I am being saved. And ultimately, I will be saved. God is in the work of sanctifying his people. This God of unguessable grace saves us, turns the curse into a blessing, and then in the process of sanctification, making us who we need to be, takes bad things, ugly things, painful things, and turns those curses into a blessing. I am not minimizing this morning pain, sorrow, wickedness at all. It's real. Yours is real. Mine is real. The Bible's realistic about those things. But what I am telling you is this. In our life, so many times, the shimmy-eyes of our life, the circumstances, the people, the situations where we find ourselves right now, they come and they're cursing and they're throwing stones and they're kicking up dust and they're calling us everything we can think of, and we think, if I could just get out of this, I'd be golden. I'd be perfect. I wouldn't have any troubles. And David is wise enough to know that God in his bigness and his unguessable grace takes even those things, and as David works his way through this, God is doing something in David's life, and this morning for the believer, God is doing something for us. For us. For us. In every person, circumstance, or infirmity, he's at work. Do you know something? That where you find yourself now and where you want to get out from under, if you stay there leaning into God, he will change some things in your life that you think are a curse to make them a blessing. You know what he's trying to do for us? He's trying to make us humble. Believe it or not, we can be pretty arrogant, self-sufficient. But do you know, when I go through something that catches me off guard, when the rocks are flying and the names are being called and the dust and dirt are in the air, you know what I do? I get on my knees and say, God, please help me. It's crazy, but I don't find me doing that when the money's in the bank and all the bills are paid and things are going swimmingly. God uses this for humility. He uses these things to take off the rough edges in our life. Some of you people, you have grown up mean. I mean mean. Like mean as a snake, mean. When you were a kid, you were mean to your brothers, your sisters, your parents, everybody you could find. Do you know something? This is a little clue for you. That's not God's purpose for your life. That's not a gift. It's not a spiritual gift. My gift is meanness. Right? That's not a gift. So God brings things into our life that shake our world, and you know what he's doing? He's knocking off those rough edges to make us gentle people. He does it for our contentment. Do you know something? When your world turns upside down, you start to think about things in a whole new light. And you and I start to think about what it is that I really need and what I really want. When things go wrong and chimney eyes are there, screaming and yelling and kicking, and we're wishing we get out from under it, you know what it does? It detaches me from this life. I understand that this is not all that there is. I begin to hate sin. And not just everyone else's sin, but my own sin. And so God is at work. This is the God of unguessable grace. He is not against me. He is for me. And we're in a season in our church where lots of people are struggling. And the temptation is to say, Abishai, cut its head off. I'm out. I can't do this. I don't want to do this. It's uncomfortable. I'm done. And David says, let him curse. Let him live. Let me go through the process, because this God that I serve is going to take this, what I believe to be a curse, and make this a blessing for my good and for his glory. For his glory. We don't need to wish it away. And I know you don't like to hear that. Because you think if I could just get rid of this thing or that person or this circumstance where I find myself right now, I would be golden. But our God is too wise for that. Can I go back to the story I began with, the divorce? I couldn't believe this week as I was thinking through those thoughts. I'm 47. Okay? That event happened at least 40 years ago. At least. Isn't it sad when you start remembering things from 40 years ago? Like, oh my goodness, that was 40 years ago. And I shouldn't remember that, but I do. Or 50 years ago. And I couldn't believe the pain. You would think at 47 it was no big deal. But I wept over it. But I have to tell you something. As I look back now at what I thought was a curse in my life, I find it to be one of the greatest blessings that God's ever given me. Do you know why? Because he's a God of unguessable grace. And that event in my life has made me the man that I am today. I'm not the perfect husband. She can testify to that. But it's maybe the husband that I am today, that I want to be. It's maybe be a father to my sons that I wanted to have. It's maybe the pastor today that I am. That when I sit across from somebody who's gone through brokenness, I don't say, gee, I wish I knew what you're talking about. I'm kind of clueless here. I'm not. And what I thought was a terrible curse that would destroy my life, it was the furthest thing from that. And again, I'm not minimizing the pain today. But I'm just telling you, this is the God of unguessable grace. And David knew him. And David knew that even though he didn't like what was happening, he could trust the hand of God. And so for us this morning, there are a couple things we need to know. The first thing is we think about God's unguessable grace, and we think about our own trouble and our own problems and the messes we have placed ourselves in. This God of unguessable grace reminds us that no matter what I feel about myself, I am not a pile of junk. Do you understand it this morning? Too many believers, we keep on going to the past, or going, I got this going on, and man alive, I can't believe this. This is terrible, this is tragic, and God must hate me. I'm just a piece of junk. I am worthless. My friend, that is the furthest thing from the truth. For the child of God, listen to me. Do you understand this? God looks at his people, wherever he finds them, and says, that's the apple of my eye. How dare we say, I'm just a piece of junk and this is my life, it's screwed up and I'll never... It's nonsense. It's nonsense this morning. When we understand this God of grace, he does not view us like that. And you might sit here this morning and say, well, Pastor, you don't know what I've done and what's going on in my life, and these are the consequences, and they seem like they never end. I don't even believe God could forgive me for this. Okay, fair enough. So let me ask you a question. Has anyone, you can raise your hand, Is there anyone in this church, someone hurt you in the past? Can you raise your hand? If someone has hurt you in the past, can you raise your hand? Really? Okay. Hold them up for a second. Some of you better put them up because I've hurt you. Okay, put them up. Okay. I make that promise. I'm telling you that. I keep it. I'll hurt you. Not intentionally, but I'll say something or do something dumb. I have a track record, a good track record. I'm 100%. Okay. So we've all been hurt, okay? Now, have you ever forgiven someone who hurt you? Ever? I mean, just, have you ever done that? Yes? Okay, good. So let me ask you a question now. How dare you? How dare you think that you are more gracious and kind and loving and forgiving than the God of heaven? You mean you can forgive people and you still think that God cannot forgive you? Where's your head at? How dare you believe that you're more gracious than the God of all grace? That you're more gracious, that while you were yet a sinner, Christ died for you. How can you even think that he forgives you thousands of times in a week? That he can't forgive you, but you, the supreme being, can forgive. You want to go back and start reading the Bible a little bit. Romans 8:1. There is now, therefore, no condemnation. None. 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 We're not junk. Yeah, we do a royal job with our life sometimes, don't we? It's like, I am so stupid. But I'm telling you, even in the midst of that, God is perfecting his people. We're not junk. He's doing a work and is all moving to a vessel of honor next to God himself. And so, as we look at the life of David, as we look at the life of his circumstance where he finds Shimei shouting and screaming and throwing dirt and dust and having a way out, let us pay attention that he says, let him curse, let him live, let him go. Why? Because in his cursing, God is going to do something that will bless me in the process. And I know it's difficult. I know it's not easy. But he knows the end from the beginning. And he does all things well. And you and I can trust him as a faithful creator. Listen to what Alexander White says about circumstances like this. And in particular this story, he says, let us then wisely, silently, and adoringly subject ourselves to it. Let us wisely, silently, and adoringly subject ourselves to it. Let him curse. Let it fly. Let the rocks come. This God of heaven is for me. He's not against me. And he is doing a work in my life that is greater than anything I could ever imagine. Unguessable, unfathomable, unbelievable grace. It's grace. Grace should come from our lips in pure sweetness when we understand what it means. This is the God of unguessable grace. And may we, wherever we find ourselves this morning, wisely, silently, and adoringly submit ourselves to it. Let's have a word of prayer this morning.